טוב. ברוכות וברוכים הבאים לכנס השנתי הבינלאומי של המכון למחקרי ביטחון לאומי. זהו הכנס ה-15 במספר, ואנחנו שמחים שאתם מצטרפים אלינו, גם ברוח התקופה זה קורה דרך.
Whether it is through live streaming because of the COVID, but it will not stop us from holding interesting, fascinating discussions with the leading decision makers in Israel that will talk about the strategic decisions on the agenda. It is my honor to invite Professor Naftali, Executive Director of INSS. After him will speak Sir Frank Lowry, Chairman of the INSS Board of Directors. Thank you very much, Kim. Good evening, everyone. Dear people, dear guests, all of those who are watching us from afar, I think we all deserve to say Shechianu v'Keimanu, which is a blessing we say when a great thing happens. That we have come here despite Omicron, despite COVID. I mean, nothing goes without saying. These days, we have with us Sir Frank Lowry, Chairman of the INSS Board of Directors. He will open our conference in a minute and will invite the Prime Minister to speak. This is a wonderful occasion to thank you, Frank, on behalf of all of us, for your support of INSS ever since it was founded and for leading so wisely throughout all these years. It has been a major component in our success. Despite the limitations we have due to COVID, I have no doubt that this conference will present an expression to the strength of INSS, to its being a major component in shaping the discussion of national security in Israel. And you can see that the Prime Minister has joined us to witness that. Also the Minister of Foreign Affairs Yair Lapid, the Minister of Defense Benny Gantz, the Tom Knights, the Ambassador of the US in Israel, and many other distinguished guests. A week ago, we have given our strategic evaluation to the President. We've presented the strategic survey, and of course the main motives that we discuss in that survey will echo and accompany us throughout this day, throughout this conference. So let me tell you, maybe just a bit, just in a nutshell, the main insights that we have seen in the survey. If there's one thing that is fixed in our existence, is that Israel is always facing a large variety of strategic threats. The nature, origin, or severity is changing everlastingly, but they are always there. Throughout the last decade, the Iranian threat has been dominant in the discussion in the national security, and unfortunately it is still with us here with all its might. But it will be quite a mistake if we let this external threat, make us forget what is happening right here in our near vicinity, under our nose, we could say, that is posing two more challenges that are not less important. First, the Palestinian arena, despite the increasing violence in Judea and Samaria. We are witnessing a dangerous movement towards one state, despite the fact that the great majority of public in Israel does not want this to happen. And to that we should add the dead end with Gaza and the tie created between what happens in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, and what is happening within the state of Israel, from Temple Mount and all the way to the mixed cities. The other great challenge has to do with the internal tear in all its varieties, the conflicts between ethnic groups, the polarization in the political scene, the non-existence of governance in the Negev, lack of trust in the authorities. All of the above are accompanying us the whole time. The Israeli public understands the severity of this tear. In the survey we've presented this week, based on
a very large survey, public survey. We found that 66% of the public says that they are quite concerned with the internal threats, more so even than the external threats. 57% think democracy in Israel is in danger. 94% have said that they are concerned about repeating of violence, conflicts between Jews and Arabs, as we have seen throughout the Guardian of the Walls. And so the Iranian threat, the Palestinian issue, question, and the internal tear are not separate challenges, but they are one triangle with interaction between those three angles, and still each one of them has to do with a different aspect of our existence. Iran and all its arms are, of course, a physical threat, and the Palestinian threat is, above all, a threat on the nature and essence of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. And the internal tear is a threat on us as a collective with a strong common denominator, able to persist the other threats. In light of that, one of the most important missions we have as a leading institution when it comes to national security in Israel is to present into the public decision and for the decision makers this perception, the fact that the strategic challenge is not only Iran, not only Hamas, not only Hezbollah, but the whole, all of that together, this triangle that is equal, that is not only about the external enemy, but also has to do with what is happening to us within Israel. From that, also the responses to this triangle threat should come not only from the hard components, that is military force, but despite the fact that this is, of course, the cornerstone of national security, but the responses should also come from the soft strength worlds, that is fighting and for the diplomacy, for influence, make wise use of the water, energy, climate in order to influence the international arena. And also from strengthening the national and social strength. In the same way, what we need to fix in the political arena is critical not only to make sure democracy will continue to exist in Israel, but also in order to make decisions that are very brave about Palestinian conflicts, and also in order to heal those internal tears in this Israeli society. And finally, let me go back to my title, to the title of the conference, Time for Critical Decisions. In Israel, we have no dull moment. We have no one aspect where we can talk about easy making decisions. Almost in every aspect, we need to make very difficult decisions. So what has changed? Why are we giving the conference this title, Time for Critical Decisions? There are processes taking place within us and around us. It seems as if they have been here in the past, they will be here in the future, and everything goes as always. But this is not how things are. These internal tears are getting stronger and bigger. Sliding into a reality of one state for both peoples is accelerating, and also these processes are changing our reality and putting in risk both who we are and both our ability to face those external threats that I've mentioned. If I might speak, for example, about the climate change, there used to be this feeling, that maybe more gas emissions, more cutting out woods, nothing serious will happen due to that. But suddenly everything has changed, and we are now experiencing extreme climate events. This is what we call a tipping point, from which it is very difficult, almost impossible, to go back. We talk a lot, and justly so, about when will Iran become a threshold nuclear state, and that actually means that they have now moved past the tipping point in that essence that is so dangerous. Dear friends, I am afraid that we are so close to the tipping point. Such tipping points also when it comes to the two other parts of my triangle of the threats, both when it comes to the Palestinian arena and both when it comes to those internal tears. And so this is the reason for this title, Time for Critical Decisions Before It is Too Late. Thank you very much. I would like to also add, with your permission, before inviting Frank to speak, to open this conference, and to invite the Prime Minister, I want to add a few words. This conference is the result of very hard work by dozens of researchers of INSS who are doing their jobs amazingly. And it is important to mention the fact that they also come from the world of national security and also from the world of the academic research. And this together, these two joint, research and practice, practical experience and thought, this is what gives the strength to INSS. Our intention is not only to publish papers. Our aim is to influence the discussion, the discourse, to influence the decision makers, the policy makers, to put onto the table not only insights to what has already happened, but also suggestions, concrete suggestions to what should be done. We have done so in the past with strategic survey, but this is something that happens once a year. And we are trying to do so all the time. And happily, I can tell you that we do get the attention of the decision makers, the security influence, and so we are very proud for that. I have the honor to invite Sir Frank Louis to open this conference formally and present the Prime Minister. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. I am very happy to open this conference, the 15th conference of the INSS. This year was very difficult, but the INSS has published many new and important researches, and I would like to thank them for that. I am also very happy that the Prime Minister, Mr. Bennett, has joined us. And that is truly very special that he has joined us here to open this conference. I wish all of us a successful conference. Thank you very much. I have the great honor to invite the Prime Minister, Mr. Naftali Bennett, to speak to us. Good evening. Chairman of INSS Board of Directors for National Security Studies, Sir Frank Louis. Executive Director of INSS, Professor Manuel Trachtenberg. The Director, Udi Dekel. Brigadier General, the Deputy, Professor Itamar Binovich. President of Tel Aviv University, Professor Poat, Ambassador of the United States in Israel, Tom Knights and his wife Virginia. Good to have you over. The former minister and a member of the Board of Directors of INSS, Tzipi Livni. The former Chief of Staff and a senior fellow in INSS, my friend Gadi Eisenkot, dear researchers of INSS, dear respected guests. Anyone who has navigated throughout a cold night in a dangerous field knows that intuition could be something, that it might wrong you. If you only trust your luck and your gut, in most cases, it won't take you far. You need to have a map in your mind. You need to have a goal. You need a compass to show you where you are compared to your destination. When we first started this government 7 months ago almost, our gut was that we have to stop the bleeding and save Israel from itself. And that was our guidance. Ever since, we've taken some major steps forward in order to stabilize that ship. We have passed the budget. We have shaken the dust from the activity of the ministries after a paralysis of several years. When it comes to foreign affairs, we have warmed up relationships that went cold, especially with the US of A, and also with our neighbors, and we've opened a new leaf, a new fresh leaf between Israel and the world. When it comes to security, everyday security, for now, we have brought some calm to the south, and we are constantly working to stop the deterioration in Judea and Samaria. Within Israel, we have stopped the political typhoon. The public arena now has to do more with civilians, with citizens, less with the leader, which is how things should be. Even the news are now shortened. Well, not greatly, but as I said, we have stabilized the ship. But in the Middle East, a calm sail is always very short-living. You have to read the map and make a decision, where do you steer the ship onwards. For that, we have to understand what is the goal, how we see the state of Israel in years to come. Israel now is 73 years and a half, and our journey forward starts with the question, what do we wish our state for its 80th birthday? Both former authorities of Israel have not, have not got to their 80th birthdays, as I say. And our duty is not only to cross 80 years, but also to bring Israel to that age when it is strong, prospering, calm, and sure of itself more than ever. So how do we do that? First of all, we need to read the map correctly. The Middle East is changing its face the whole time. New alliances come to life. Old alliances become irrelevant. And so the first rule we should have is flexibility, agility, buying friends, neutralizing enemies. The United States has been and will always be our best friend and ally. But Washington has their own interests that, and we have to frankly say, they do not overlap our interests, and we speak very honestly and openly about it. We understand each other. The United States' interest in the Middle East is decreasing. Naturally, it is now looking forward to the Russia-Ukrainian border, but also even further into the long term, it has a strategic conflict, long years, with China. This is reality. There's no point in complaining. We have to work within those circumstances, not in the fanciful, wishful world. And this new reality is making us face challenges, but also creates opportunities. In the geopolitical arena, there's never a vacuum. There's never emptiness. If anything becomes empty, something else takes its place immediately. And the place of the United States in the arena might be filled by forces of terror and hatred, God forbid. But of course, if we will take the right steps, Israel could take that empty place. The infrastructure of friendship with our neighbors could become the beginning of a great friendship, and together we can better face the challenges we are faced by our enemies from around, those who stop our stability, try to shake our stability. And I always try to explain to our friends in the world that stability here has to do with people who wake up every morning with one goal: to stop the calmness, to stop the stability, to create chaos and war. from Houthis in Yemen to the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia militias in Iraq, and so on. What all of those have in common is that they send a receipt at the end of every month to Tehran. The way I see our Iran as the beginning of the access of most of the threats on us, as the head of the octopus, I have presented here about 4 years ago, and even then, when I was the Minister of Defense, and now as Prime Minister of Israel, I am still seeing things that way, but even more so, and I have adapted it to reality. This move to make Iran weakened is on its way, and it is taking place in many different aspects when it comes to cyber, economy, nuclear, open and also discrete actions, solo and also in work with others in cooperation. But the basic principle is the same. Beirut or Gaza might send the rocket, but the address is always Tehran, and as weaker as Tehran gets, its arms are weaker. If the head of the octopus is hungrier, its arms, its tentacles are smaller. And so our borders, we will have enemies that are much weaker. This logic is absolutely screaming out loud, but relieving the sanctions and giving Tehran millions of dollars, those mean, friends, more rockets, more UAVs, more terror, more cyber attacks, more of everything, not only against us, by the way, but also against our US allies and our other allies. We follow the nuclear talks in Vienna, and when we know what we're talking about, we hope that it will end with no deal, because this deal is not good for Israel. But even with the agreement, we still believe that Iranians will continue to be Iranians. We see it as we speak throughout the negotiations, while the Iranian foreign ministries are sitting with the powers. At those moments, the police within Iran is behaving like a bully, attacking throughout those talks in the Emirates and in other places. This is exactly what we call negotiations under fire. This is just not working. If an agreement is signed and they're getting new dollars into the pockets, we all understand that Iranian aggressivity will only become stronger and stronger in the area. We in Israel are ready. We will still face them in every way possible. No agreement will tie our hands from acting for the benefit of security for the Israeli citizens. The Israeli strategy still stands, even if there is an agreement. Anyway, it will only buy us a very short time until it sunsets, or whether if there is no agreement. In both cases, our fight still continues. Which brings me to the greater question, friends. How do we sustain a prospering democratic state in a dangerous area that is unstable, in a world that does not have just one international police? What should we do in order to prepare Israel for the next decade and even farther than that? And the answer is economical growth and military growth. This you can see already in both decisions we've made as a government, not simple ones. First one is that we are managing this COVID crisis ever since I became Prime Minister without quarantines, without lockdowns, even if it is difficult. The paralysis of our economy is not an option. The second is that we have given a very great big budget, separate budget, for strengthening military forces, economic growth and military growth. This is our move. I want to explain that. Israel has to have a very strong economy. Israeli GNP has to become $1 trillion, which is possible. High-tech should be not 12% of the GNP, but double that. The economy has to stay open and functioning even through this pandemic decade we are living through. Democracy has to be stable and the society has to be stable, and the level of the life has to rise, and the prices have to go down. A rich, prospering state could give a big part of its incomes to building power, to strengthen, because GNP also has to do with the size of population, but security is not linear with that. You can take lots of money and just pour it into empowerment, not to military bureaucracy, but to building abilities that open a huge gap between Israel and all the others. Because the stronger we are, the more deterrence we have, and the more deterrence we have, the smaller chance there is that we have to use that power, and the more time, quiet time, peaceful time we have, the more we can grow economically. It is a magic circle. It's a positive magic circle. Economic growth, strengthening, stability, more economic growth, and it's repeating. For that, we need to use our amazing technological abilities and manage wisely our resources. Today, for example, we have a terrorist in Khan Yunis putting up a rocket that he's created himself. It cost him a couple of hundreds of dollars, and he's shooting it to Israel. But the Iron Dome, on the contrary, costs thousands of dollars, dozens of thousands. And this does not make any sense because it allows terrorists to shoot more and more rockets. And we have to pay up millions to face every one of those, all of these rockets. This is not something that is sustainable. We have decided to stop this. And it will happen within only a few years. Within 1 year already, IDF has put into action a new laser system. First, just as an experiment, and then operationally, first only in South and then also in other places. And that will allow us to put a laser wall around Israel that will defend us from rockets, UAVs, drones, and other threats. But in fact, it will negate, it will take away from the enemy the strongest card that they hold against us, which is this economic imbalance. It will go on, on its head. They will spend a lot of money. We will spend few dollars, because if we can just use an electric pulse to stop a rocket and it costs us only a few dollars, only a handful of dollars, we're actually taking away this firing that Iran has placed on our borders with a huge investment. All of this is not paying up anymore. This new generation of aerial defense will be able to allow us to help our friends in the geographical part of the world, that they are also exposed to threats from Iran and its friends and allies. And this is how we will create something useful. We will use what we have in order to give to the world, to get more support, more allies, and become stronger yet. We do it in so many fields, cyber, through technologies that assist fighting the global warming, all the way to COVID, following up new variants, dealing with these. We are always in the forefront, and daily I talk to different leaders from the world, also through WhatsApp, because we are all in the same boat. And today they come to us on a daily basis to discuss with us, to get our advice. And when we have such relationship, then you find yourself in a totally different place when you need them. The conflict with our neighbors that used to define almost every connection with the world, the Palestinian conflict, is still there, but it's a lot less defining us. Israel is much stronger than just this conflict because we have a lot to give. In these coming years, Israel will be defined the way it will become for the next generation. I hold the responsibility, we hold it, to build a power that will prepare Israel in decades to come. Economy and safety and security. These days we put up the infrastructure for another leap forward economically. The last budget, in the law, we have set up a lot of regulation. We have encouraged competition in the market. We have put forward the ultra-Orthodox into the economy, into the labor market, by letting them not serve in the IDF, which no other ministry minister in Israel has done before. It's been my dream for a decade, and yesterday was the first call in the Knesset. It has been passed. Like a spring, the energy, the entrepreneurship, the power in the Israeli entities and in all of the citizens in Israel, Jews, Arabs, Orthodox, secular, this energy will leap forward and the Israeli economy will just fly forward with less bureaucracy and more competition. And these days, we are taking steps forward for military empowerment after a few years of paralysis because we could not pass the budget. The budget was not passed because we have come to a gap in this empowerment. And we are not only closing it, but we are also empowering, more than that, running forward. So growth and empowerment and growth. Our enemies are busy in destruction, and we, God help, we are busy building the state of Israel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We will now take a 2-minute break, and when we come back, we will have an interview between His Excellency Thomas Knight and Professor Manuel Trachtenberg.
Mr. Ambassador, a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. I believe this is your first time at the INSS, but certainly not the last.
Thank you.
You recently took your post as ambassador at a time when there are serious concerns in Israel about the role of the U.S. in the Middle East, the extent to which the U.S. is willing to address the many strategic challenges in the region. We heard as much from the Prime Minister. Can you reassure us that the U.S. will keep a significant presence here? As you know, there is not such a thing as a vacuum in geopolitics.
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here, and this is an honor not only for myself, but for the United States to be asked to come and, as ambassador. I'm honored to be here, and I want to tell you I'm honored to be in the presence of the Prime Minister. As you know, the administration feels quite strongly about the Prime Minister and this coalition. He, as Common said, it's a beautiful thing what you all have created here. And with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister coming together, this is what democracy is all about. And this administration, the Biden administration, from the White House to the State Department, is not only honored to work with this coalition, but feels that the country is in the right hands at a very critical time. Listen, when I got here, when I testified on my confirmation, I made it very clear. I have one objective, and I think I speak for the president, is to enhance this democratic Jewish state. And what I mean by that, I don't really share an ideology. All I have is a North Star, and that is the North Star. And so when I think about the North Star, it's like, okay, what are your priorities? And the priorities are what the president has told me my priorities should be. And number one is, as the president has said, this is unbreakable ties between Israel and the United States. And my job is to reinforce that. What does that mean? In practical, I see our national security advisor, Israel's national security advisor, he knows quite quickly what that means. It means the unbinding commitment to the defense of the state of Israel. That is the Iron Dome, that is the MOU. It is all the aspects that we as the United States can provide the state of Israel. Number two is our view is that we need to keep the vision of a two-state solution alive. It's very important. There are no illusions that I'm going to be at the Rose Garden doing a signing, but that doesn't mean we cannot keep a vision alive. We are also helping to support the Palestinian people by dramatically increasing assistance, working with them. And third, as the Prime Minister just said, this is about an economic miracle that goes on here. If the economy is not strong in Israel, you cannot have a strong defense. And my job is to not only continue to enhance that by supporting things such as the Abraham Accords and the visa waiver program and the practical stuff about working on this issue around the startup nation and helping drive economic support. So our idea of the United States' commitment to this country is not only ironclad, but we understand it's who we are as a people. The United States and Israel are one when it comes to defense, when it comes to economics, and focus, because going back to your question, the focus of this president, this is probably, in my view, not only the most committed president to the Middle East, but the most knowledgeable. Here's the guy who has not only been the vice president for 8 years, was a chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, was a chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Every single issue around Israel and the United States and its security, he has been in the middle of it. So to say the focus is laser focus on the security of the State of Israel.
Well, that's great to hear, and we certainly are very pleased to hear that. But nevertheless, there are concerns here about the sharp divisions within the Democratic Party and the extent to which that may affect the commitment to Israeli security, and also the polarization in U.S. politics. Does it affect the bipartisan support that we used to have in Congress?
Let me be clear, very, very clear about this. The vast majority of the Democrats and Republicans support the ironclad commitment to this country, okay? That's the MOU, that's the Iron Dome, it's the support of this country. Sure, are there a few voices who share or express objections? Sure, and they should have every right to do that. However, if they cross the line, any voice that crosses the line and steps into an idea of anti-Semitic or anti-Israel in a way that's just not a productive way, then we need to be clear. But voices need to be able to express themselves, and that's what makes Israel what Israel is. That's what makes the United States what the United States is. But it's clear to me the commitment is solid, and I've said this. I think I said this to you in my office when you came to see me. We can't also stick our head in the sand to say that that there aren't younger generations that don't have the same commitment that some of us do to security. They don't. The history of the place. It's like I had the opportunity to speak at the Holocaust Remembrance. We got to keep remembering who this country is and keep reminding people so we don't forget that. And I think we have that commitment. So I'm very confident the bipartisan support of Israel is rock solid.
We just heard the Prime Minister talking extensively about Iran and the fact that Israel has to invest a great deal in order to face the challenge from that part of the world. The negotiations in Vienna sort of continue. I mean, there is a break now. International attention is focused on the Ukraine. The U.S. seems to have its plate full, both with what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia and with China. And all of this they're not very good news for us, for Israel. What can we expect in that respect? Are we here, as the Prime Minister seems to imply, on our own, or can we also trust that the United States will be part of the effort to contain Iran?
Yeah, let me be, again, as clear as I can be. The President has made it abundantly clear. The United States will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. As Mr. Khalada knows, he speaks to the White House every day. We have conversations multiple times a day. We are in the midst of talking to our negotiators every day. This administration can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, we're focused on Russia and Ukraine, and we're also focusing on making sure the Iranians do not get a nuclear weapon. And we are here as partners to Israel. One of the things we wanted to make it clear at the onset of the Biden administration, there'll be no light between what's going on in Vienna as it relates to making sure we're communicating directly with the Israelis. So we're all clear. We want a diplomatic solution to this. There's no question, and I know the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the national security of Israel understands we'd like to find a diplomatic solution to this. I think it's in Israel's best interest, it's in the world's best interest. But make no mistake, we will not stand by to let Iran create and have a nuclear weapon.
Thank you. Let's go to the Palestinian issue. It's always there bubbling, as you know. The two sides, the Palestinians and us, the Israelis, we seem to be unable to engage in a meaningful political process by ourselves. The last half-baked initiative was Trump's deal of the century. It's not clear to which century he was referring to, but nevertheless, not surprisingly, nothing came out of it. Do you think that the Biden administration may at some point try to take a more proactive role, or perhaps prompted by a crisis that is never far away? And moreover, could the Abraham Accords switch from having been conceived as a bypass to the Palestinian issue to perhaps serving as a platform to help make progress in that regard?
Well, that's a big question. Let me just take it in a couple pieces. Number one, the Biden administration is fully and completely committed to a two-state solution. We believe that a two-state solution is the long-term interest of the state of Israel. There might be people who differ with that. That is the position of the United States, and there's a position of many, many Israelis as well, number one. Number two, we believe it is imperative that we take care of the Palestinian people. Take care of the Palestinian people. This administration's, after the previous administration, has not only increased from zero, by the way, of the previous, we have now up to $450 million of a direct assistance to the Palestinian people, including money to other organizations that support the Palestinian people. We believe that they deserve the dignity and security as Israelis do. That is our fundamental belief, that they deserve that. And we also agree, as you share, it's the long-term interest of Israel to treat the Palestinian people with that respect and dignity, and hopes that we can create the momentum of a vision and a two-state solution. It is not simple. We as the administration spend an enormous time making sure that neither sides do stupid things to screw that up. And that's not maybe a diplomatic term, but it's a reality. And by the way, it's not just the Israelis, it's not just the Palestinians, it's everyone in the region to try to create the environment so we can have potentially lasting peace. So, you talk about the Abraham Accords. I am an enormous fan of the Abraham Accords. Listen, I'm now nonpartisan, but in my previous life, I may have been a little bit more partisan. This administration is fully supportive of what the Trump administration did on the Abraham Accords because, again, going back to my North Star of what's good for a strong democratic Jewish state, the Abraham Accords is that. It helps, and I would hope at some point that the Palestinians will not only embrace the Abraham Accords, but the Abraham Accords will embrace the Palestinians. Because at the end of the day, it's got to be tangible to the Palestinian people. They've got to feel it. And if they feel it, they'll embrace it.
Well, lastly, Mr. Ambassador, you have lots of duties here as a U.S. ambassador in this part of the world. But have you set for yourself additional goals beyond being ambassador, the formal part of it? I mean, do you have expectations? We know that you have been getting to know all the good restaurants in Israel. What about other things?
Well, listen, when they asked me if I would agree to be the ambassador, I literally, how phenomenal is it, okay, to be able to come to a place that you care deeply about, emotionally about, that is so interesting, that every day that you're spending time thinking about how you can make this place a better place. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, I'm a Jewish kid from Duluth, Minnesota, okay? I'm not a religious Jew. I'm a cultural Jew from Minnesota, and I come to this country to embrace everyone, from the ultra-Orthodox to the secular and everything in between. And I care deeply about straightness. So the things I want to do, I want people to say, listen, he wasn't ideological. He wanted to spend time with the Palestinians. He wanted to spend time with the ultra-Orthodox. He wanted to spend and he wanted to do the right thing. And if I can figure out ways to do that, and people say, ultimately, this is about Joe Biden. It's not about Tom Nides. It's about Joe Biden. This is how Joe Biden thinks about diplomacy. This is how he thinks about this country. This is how he thinks about the future of Israel. He says all the time that he considers himself a Zionist. I certainly consider myself a Zionist. I care deeply about the people, the security of the state of Israel. So I hope that I can make a modicum of change, but to reinforce that message.
Well, thank you very much, as we say in Hebrew, amen, to everything you said. And as I said at the beginning, this is your first visit. Please consider the INSS to be wide open for you at any time. We will try to bring you from time to time here for you to share with us your knowledge, your interests, and the policies of the U.S. Thank you very much.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
ערב טוב לכולם. אנחנו נעבור לנושא הבא.
Good evening. We're moving on to the next subject and concluding you into a great challenge that we've dealt with here in the Institute, in which we did a simulation, an international simulation exercise, in order to examine whether there is a way to promote a political move between us, Israel, and the Palestinians. It begins the scenario with an escalation, and then that escalation moves on and spreads, where the international community decides maybe to say enough is enough, sit down and, sort of come out with a deal. And you'll see the results. The most significant challenge was doing this remotely, this simulation, when we had throughout the simulation participants, people, senior people in the past and present from Egypt, and of course the Emirates and Jordan and the Palestinian Authority, China, Russia, and of course from the United States, from France, and from Germany. And we are now going to show you a short clip in order to describe what happened throughout the simulation and then try to analyze what happened.
עם תחילת חודש רמדאן פורצות מהומות ברחבת הר הבית, בעידוד חמאס ותנועות אסלאמיות שמנסות לשחזר את הצלחתם בחודש מאי אשתקד. כוחות משטרת ישראל פועלים לדיכוי המהומות ונכנסים למתחם אל-אקצא. הדבר מגביר את גל המהומות בירושלים, בשטחי הרשות הפלסטינית, בגדה המערבית ואף בירדן. מחאות של הזדהות עם הפלסטינים ברחוב הירדני מובילות להתנגשות עם גורמי הביטחון ומאיימות על יציבות הממלכה ההאשמית. חמאס מנצל את ההזדמנות למצב עצמו כמגן ירושלים ואל-אקצא. הוא משגר רקטות לעבר עוטף עזה ויעדים אסטרטגיים בעומק ישראל, כולל כלי טייס בלתי מאוישים תוקפים שגורמים ל-12 הרוגים בדרום. במקביל, פלגים פלסטינים בסוריה ובלבנון משגרים רקטות גרד לעבר יישובי אצבע הגליל ופוגעים במספר מבנים ללא נפגעים בנפש. בעוד צה"ל פועל מול רצועת עזה לדיכוי השיגורים, המשטרה מגבירה את פעילותה בירושלים לקראת חג הפסח המתקרב. מפלגת רע"מ קוראת לממשלה להפחית את המתחים ולא להגבירם, ומאיימת להפיל את הממשלה. ירדן חוששת מאוד מההשלכות על היציבות בממלכה ובאזור כולו. היא מחליטה שהגיעה העת ליזום מהלך מדיני בחסות האו"ם לזימון ועידה בינלאומית לפתרון הסכסוך הישראלי-פלסטיני. ירדן מוכנה להידבר אך ורק עם רמטכ"ל צה"ל. במהלך ביקורו החשאי בירדן, המלך עבדאללה השני מעביר לממשלת ישראל איגרת ובה הבהרה: אם ישראל תסכל את היוזמה המדינית הירדנית ולא תצליח להרגיע את הרוחות, לא תיוותר לירדן ברירה והיא תיאלץ להקפיא את יחסי השלום. ירדן, בתיאום עם צרפת והאיחוד האירופי, מכנסת את פורום מינכן המורכב מירדן, מצרים, צרפת וגרמניה. הן מחליטות לקדם החלטה במועצת הביטחון שכופה על ישראל והפלסטינים פרמטרים להסדר תחת מטריה בינלאומית במטרה לפתור את הסכסוך אחת ולתמיד.
The Middle East has come to this forum on many occasions in the past, but I think never graver than the situation we see today. This Council is committed to global security and peace, and we face a serious challenge in the Middle East to global security and peace. I think if this Council does not act, if this Council does not do what it is supposed to do, and try to break a way out of this violence, we will be negligent of our duty. We will not be doing what we need to do. Now, there is a proposal before this Council that confirms with the spirit of the United Nations, which talks about creating peace, which talks about creating an end to the Israeli occupation, which talks about a two-state solution. which talks about guaranteeing Israel and all the country of the region's security. I believe it would be irresponsible if the Council did not embrace these proposals.
The violent escalation we are currently witnessing in the Middle East is fast and furious. It risks a regional conflagration of unprecedented scale. It's a serious threat to stability and integrity of regional states. We call on all parties involved to immediately step back from the brink. Recent events show, without any doubt, that managing the conflict can bring only a semblance of stability. It cannot provide a lasting solution. Neither does it help fulfill the aspirations of both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians. But the crisis that we face might also be an opportunity. It should help us focus on our shared objective to prevent further harm to innocent civilians and to preserve regional stability.
Mr. Chairman, I want to salute the leadership of INSS in raising this issue now. It is one of the crucial issues unresolved after decades, still facing the world. And while some may think the United States has left the Middle East behind, I want to assure everyone that it has not.
We think that this resolution gives a prize, a reward to the terrorism in the region, and we think that you have to move it from the table because it's not the time to do that. We are under attack. We are attacked by terrorists from all over.
We appreciate the concerns you have with the resolution. However, our reading of the situation is different. The reading is that as long as there is no solution, as long as the occupation remains, as long as there is argument for radicals with which they can mobilize in the region, we will not come towards stability. And this is why we think this is exactly the time. We have waited far too long to engage and try to resolve that conflict. And we feel that now Israel, with the backing of states in the region, has much larger room for maneuver, has more backing.
Israel's security is a huge deal to me, but I also don't think there can be security for Israel without some form of better arrangement between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
We don't like the language of the resolution. We always try to go not through the Security Council resolution in advancing the political process between Israel and the Palestinians. But on the other hand, the situation is problematic, is fragile, and we think that there is a risk to the peace process between Israel and Jordan.
We cannot bear the situation anymore. Demonstration everywhere, and the political situation in the country is in danger. Unless we find and we get a fair resolution for both to establish this two-state solution, I think the situation will get worse and worse. And I want to reiterate our position on the status quo with the Palestinians.
China and firmly supports the just cause of the Palestinian people and the right to an independent state. And China has always supported the Middle East peace process.
At UAE, although it has that Abraham Accord with State of Israel, but it's always stating that the only solution for the crisis between the Palestinian and Israeli is two-state solution. And UAE believe that it can bring the two parties together based on the Abraham Accord and what is the advantage economically, politically can deliver through that Abraham Accord for both Palestinian and Israel.
And the security in the region, without solving the problem of the Palestinians, I don't think it will be 100%, the perfect way of doing it. That the problem of the Palestinians must be solved. The recognition of the state of Palestine within the UN Security Council, it is the first step to recognize the state of Palestine in the border of 4th of June 1967. And you can work in the interim period in order to implement that. It's fine with us. We will accept it. So please, first of all, we want our dignity, we want our freedom, and we want a better future for our children. That's the way you should think about it, and not to start to talk about the region as a whole without neglecting other people that they need to live in peace with their neighbors as well.
When it is the time to speak about the profound situation, about the two-state solution, when it is the time to speak about the permanent status, when it will never be the time. Our Israeli partners have to start to speak directly to Palestinians, and they have to start to acknowledge their right to live in their independent state.
Without a solution from the Security Council, there will not be peace in this area. The two parties will never agree.
UN and the UN Security Council to launch a new international and multiple and peace process for the Middle East. And because we China think that UN and the UN Security Council has the responsibility and also has the obligation to try to promote a new peace conferences to solve the Arab-Israel and Palestinian-Israel conflicts. And we China think it's necessary and it's possible and to launch a new international conferences. So in the near future.
We don't think that another big international conference, 2 quartets, 3 quartets, 4 quartets is now a situation that we are in. We believe that we have to think about the Moscow Initiative, which is logically a number of working groups on different issues concerning different, as Israelis have just mentioned, different issues concerning the region. Not only war and peace issues, but economic issues, social issues, and other deep-rooted in the region issues.
And we are going to convene our own international conference in Tehran and invite the real representatives of the Palestinian people, meaning the resistance front of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Thank you.
Being one and a member of UN Security Council, maybe US can support, help meet the summit in Abu Dhabi, giving its also dynamic role in the region, and also based in it can bring another solution which can come out of the box.
If the Palestinians, they do not agree in a resolution or in this text on their demand, if they don't find it satisfying, they will not accept it. Right. So if we want to make something that is not vetoed by the United States, it will not be accepted by the Palestinians. So we have first to see what the Palestinian demand, and it should be in the text so that it is accepted. We have, Jordan has worked many times to let the two meet and talk. I think there was not enough effort from the United States to make the two sides meet and talk. Do we need another Camp David?
I'd like to open this session by asking the delegate of France, did you reach agreements with your interlocutors?
Unfortunately, and I deeply deplore that, we could not agree on a text for a joint resolution or on a joint resolution as such. So what we want to suggest here is to go for a presidential statement.
I want to commend both the Jordanians and the French for helping to arrive at a constructive interim step. This does not foreclose a Security Council resolution, and it does not predict a U.S. veto of some kind of resolution we will perhaps develop in the near future. So I am not against those things, but what I am for is a way immediately to include new parties, certainly including, as you called it, the Arab Quartet, and perhaps a new venue that could refresh the conversation and try to see whether there is more common ground. I've said repeatedly that we can't want this more than the parties on the ground want it. And there is a severe disconnect at the moment between the Israelis and the Palestinians on a way forward. The Israelis are against a UN Security Council resolution. It's not the US position, it's the Israeli position. And so hopefully after this interim step, monitored by the UN, which includes a lot of parties that we haven't heard from, that maybe we will hear from, but others, we will get to a more enlightened view, which will finally, unlike prior UN Security Council resolutions, have traction on the ground and achieve the mutually desired result.
Disappointed by not putting a resolution with the UN Security Council, but I will go with the statement that you made, that we will continue this in order to pursue others, in order to start the negotiation between us and the Israelis. And we welcome the Quartet and the Arab Quartet and the international conference to take place as soon as possible in order to put the agenda for how to move forward.
We think that it has to deal not just with the Palestinian issue, but also with other regional issues and conflicts. If we are talking about having an international conference, and we hope that it will bring something good for the region anyway.
3 points in a presidential statement. As you know, a presidential statement does not have the authority of a Security Council resolution, but it nevertheless expresses the opinion of the Council. We have 3 elements here. 1, a call for the immediate cessation of all hostilities and incitement. Number 2, an international conference under the auspices of the Quartet and the Arab Quartet. I think the proposal is it will be held maybe in the UAE. Is that acceptable? And that will deal with final status issues, 2 states, resolving the problem. And the third element is that this council will remain seized of the matter in the future. In other words, this council will continue to deal with this issue as needs be.
Thank you very much to all of the participants in the simulation, also the INSS researchers and the foreign participants. As I said, it was a real challenge to get everybody in together and then bring it in a short clip, condense it. We're now going to have a conversation amongst ourselves to understand, are there insights, conclusions that we can draw from the simulation from our life today, for our life today? With us, I don't have to explain, we have, of course, former Israeli Foreign Ministry and Vice Prime Minister Tzipi Livni. She's a member of the INSS. We have, of course, Gadi Eisenkot, Lieutenant General and former IDF Chief of General Staff, and he's also a senior researcher here. I'm going to begin with you, Gadi, if I may. We saw in the simulation that most of the international participants are like in a Madrid 2 in order to force on the sides parameters of an agreement in Israel. It was the only one who was horrified of the idea of an international conference and worked and was trying to influence the United States to stop it. Now, why are we so afraid of an international convention? Good evening. The word fear really doesn't reflect the understanding of the position of the Israelis in the simulation. The situation in which Israel is in the simulation, it talks about a scenario of escalation in Jerusalem, missile attack in Gaza, attacks from Syria and Lebanon, and then, of course, having an international conference. And from Israel, in that particular scenario, that would be very bad to get to a decision from a position of weakness when you have regional escalation in the area and Israel is dragged into an international conference. Generally speaking, the state of Israel has to have negotiations for the future of the state from a position of power and strength, and not as a result from a scenario in which we are forced into dealing with escalation and forced to the negotiation table because of that. And so the resistance was, and the objection was very understandable with the events that were unfolding in the simulation. They were completely against the national security interest of the state of Israel, that has to make very fateful decisions from a position of strength and not while dealing with escalation that creates a difficult state of affairs here that may also force us into making deals that are not good for us. Now, Tzipi, I turn to you now. When I talked to you throughout the simulation, you said an international conference is a tool, a means to an end, but you have to understand what the end is. What is the goal? What does Israel want? But before we talk about the interests, first of all, the state of Israel and us as well have to talk about the vision of Israel, and from that vision, then understand our interests, our strategies, our tactics, and so forth. Now, by the way, parenthetically, let me add, the concern of international conferences and conventions, that is part of the decision maker's role, because usually the Security Council, as soon as they hear it, or Israeli Prime Minister, they always try to call the American president to ask for the veto. This is from my experience, I know that when you're not at such large gaps against the world, then you can initiate Security Council decisions that serve your interest. I'm not only talking about the 1701 about the Palestinians. The decisions of the U.S. Council in Sharm el-Sheikh would have come down and really reflected the Israeli interest that today is now a Palestinian interest, with no coercion, with no one being forced, without us being forced to live with the reality that we don't with you. Now, yes, there is division in Israel. That's obvious. There is a rift. And so when we talk about the interest that will be presented, whether it's in an international conference or a Security Council, then let us first agree amongst ourselves, what is our vision for Israel? Now, every Israeli knows how to say, yeah, Israel has to be Jewish and democratic and safe. Okay, but what does that mean? What of each of these words, what do they mean? Each group in Israel provides a completely different content to the word Jewish, to the word democratic, and the word in Israel. Is Jewish and democratic, must it be for all of Israel or some of Israel? And so if we don't know, first of all, to define for ourselves our common goal, our vision, then basically we're just sort of pushing forward policy without that interest of ours being a unified interest, meaning it's divisive. So that's the first thing, the first priority, and that's why all of this conference that brought about this need for decision is so important right now, what we're discussing, because we are at a point currently, and excuse me, but this international conference that you brought together is not in real person, because the world doesn't care about the conflict as much as it did in the past. Well, that brings me as a segue to the next question, because we saw in the simulation three very important things. This was an exercise. Everybody was for peace, but no one was tenacious. Everybody looks at their own narrow interests and what they gain and what they lose, and do they host or not host. And anybody who says that United States is not a key partner, they were the key partner. They were the ones dictating the rules. The United States were the ones who were unfolding the plot, as it were. That's what we saw. At the end, we're left alone. In regards to what you said, we're left alone, as it were, with the Palestinian problem, without knowing what we want ourselves, as you pointed out. First of all, let's not call it the Palestinian problem. It's the Israeli problem. It's our problem. And the moment we understand that this is our problem and we need to resolve it, then I think internally we'll think about it differently as well, because a lot of people in the state of Israel have a sigh of relief. They say the world doesn't care anymore about the conflict. There were 4 elections. None of them spoke about this. And there's this feeling of ease and comfort in which suddenly people are, it's as if you were in a vehicle, in a car, and nobody's forcing you to drive in this direction or that. Some of the public are very, very glad that, Netanyahu, positioned himself in protection of this, but we don't have a common goal today in which we're moving towards that goal together. And without that vision, common to all of us, the car, as it were, the vehicle, supposedly the metaphor that we're in, it's not going to stay in the driveway. It's going to drive somewhere. And we have a country, whether it's between the Jordan River and the sea or whatever, and whether it may not be Jewish or democratic in the end, and don't be concerned. It's not like the newspapers say. We have no apartheid in Israel, but we must make sure that there never is apartheid, not because of what the world says and what the world has to say, but because of our own core values. And that's why these decisions are critical. Okay, in extension to that, I know that you want to respond, but I just want to bring in one more fact. We had a survey that was conducted about the sense of national security among the public. We do this every year. And it came up from the survey for the first time that the support of the public for the two-state solution has gone under, but no, 50%. It used to be usually around 60% up to 70%. Now it's below 50% support for the two-state solution. Okay. But this is on the other hand, the public expressed 60% of the public support separating now from the Palestinians, right now, not in the future. How do you resolve this conflict? Well, let me a little bit talk about the vision and the goals, because I think it is, especially as we are about to celebrate 74 years of independence, we have to adopt the Declaration of Independence as our seminal work. Amen. Yes, that it determines our vision. And as regards to the reality that you described, that happens after a year in which 50% Jews, 50% Arabs, between, the Jordan River and the sea. If you took 2.8 million Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, or 2.5 in Gaza, and with the Arabs of Israel, that's almost 50-50-50. And the question is about the identity of Israel and where it wants to go. But the statistics that you show are very unsettling, and they join another image in the Palestinian side of increasingly more and more young Palestinians, educated, frustrated, and despondent and despairing, that are working with their authorities for a one-state solution, meaning lots of areas of Judea and Samaria, and that's very concerning. So in the statistics that you stated, I think we should add one thing to show the contrast. Very few people, a small percentage, support the two, one state for two people. And that's why so many people now are talking about separating from the Palestinians. This is what we saw as well in the scenario of the simulation. The question is, how do we move forward when we say we want economic peace? And when we talk to Palestinian leaders, they say economic peace is at the end. We want to see, first of all, our goal. So I think in terms of our own security, and the desire to take initiative and to make critical decisions from our national interest and our long-term national security, not because of some political administration here and now. We want to know what we need to think of in the far future for Israel and see what direction can we take, and then we can see what milestones are required that would bridge the way to a better future for both peoples, with the understanding that there was a process, there were milestones, like the GOP that was supposed to conclude with a final status in 1999, and then it evolved into an intifada. And afterwards, when they tried to take the whole peace package, that collapsed and turned into violence. So we need a way that provides a horizon and builds a path to that horizon, which is in a win-win situation for both sides, with all of the differences of culture and beliefs, and the fact that we have here a profound conflict which is completely different from the peace agreements between Israel and Jordan, or Israel and Egypt, or Israel and the UAE. So what we have with the Palestinians is an issue which is complex versus the other challenges that we faced. With Ms. Herman, who was the ambassador in the simulation, the U.S. ambassador, said, let's do intermediary steps. Now, I'd like to go back to you, Ms. Livni, because you talk about directions, but the public is divided. Yes, they are. More than half are afraid of a Palestinian state. The biggest catastrophe in their eyes is, the Palestinian state. That would ruin Zionism. The other half are terrified of demographics and that we will find ourselves in a one state with a Palestinian. How do you deal with this divide? First of all, this is a profound disagreement of identity and ideology. It's a disagreement between, though their national direction talks about the Jewish democratic state and wanting to preserve both Judaism and democracy, on wanting to have and knowing that we have to have a Jewish majority in order to do that, and the need to separate from the Palestinians. Up to now, I haven't said anything controversial, but the path to separate from the Palestinians. Now, I don't care about a Palestinian state. I care about the democratic Israeli state of Israel. I want to end a conflict. That's what I care about. Now, if we can find a solution that would remain Israel, would allow Israel to remain Jewish and democratic with a Jewish majority, we would accept that. But that's not what the other side is proposing. But here in Israel, they talk about the land of Israel, and many people in Israel push for the land of Israel and over long-term Israeli national security issues. Now, this is not semantics. There will be a mixed state here. This is not semantic, mixed. And if you remember, think about what happened in the mixed cities of Israel. So this is not something that suddenly emerged, but it is coming up, and it's happening in places that we find uncomfortable to deal with. And that's what happens with a mixed country. And the vast majority of Israel doesn't want that, in my opinion. So even in the surveys that you mentioned, there's greater support of separating from the Palestinians than a two-state solution, because separation seems like, let's have a divorce, let's divide up the property. And the other proposal sounds like we have to continue in this bad marriage and live in together. So the public has to understand that those who are saying or for a two-state solution, it's not a two-state solution because we care about the establishment of a Palestinian state, but rather we care about, after let's have, a secure state of Israel. Let's have borders, maybe. Borders we can protect. At the moment, all of that is still left an open question. So let's not hide issues. After many years in which the supporters of the two-state solution constantly were considered pro-Palestinian, they were traitors to the state, horrific things were said about people who were for the two-state solution. But what is happening now, at least positively speaking, I think only unity can bring Israel together. But unity is not enough, even that. And what happened maybe will allow us to conduct this discourse that must be conducted and decisions must be made, but maybe will be a bit more businesslike without all the hatred and diatribe. And another remark, why is this so important? Because our history as a people in Israel has proven that after making very difficult decisions, we have had cohesion, even with the establishment of the state. I remind you, we all like to remember the decisiveness of 1947 decision to establish a state, and then finally a state was established, and there was a declaration of independence. Yes, and everybody signed it. Revisionists and communists and ultra-Orthodox and socialists, everybody signed the Declaration of Independence. The same as the peace agreement with Egypt. I remind you the protests and Tzachi Hanegbi standing on the tower and the horrible terrorist attacks. But 40 years later, the Israeli Prime Minister stands and says, this is the most important security achievement since the establishment of the state. I have a few more minutes. Gadi, what do you do tomorrow morning? Let's say, I must remark that the INSS published a memorandum just recently that Pnina Shervit Baruch wrote that really describes the reality of a one-state solution, meaning a mixed state. I suggest you read it. It's horrifying, but okay. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't do anything special maybe, but I would suggest for all of us to, leave this sort of cycle and say that when it's quiet, why should we do anything? And when there's escalation, it's not the time to do anything because, yes, right, there's always... Right. There's always a reason to sit on the fence. But if our most basic national interests should be, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, a Jewish, democratic, progressive, egalitarian, tolerant state, Israel that is, the cornerstone of all of the Jewish people for everyone around the world, then we have to make decisions about our identity, about the future of the state of Israel, with all of the divisions and disagreements we have in Israeli society. I don't think today we can make these decisions because it will end in either escalation and internal conflict. But even if you look to the horizon, to the future, and you begin to build a format which is good for both sides, with security arrangements which are clear and definitive, I think that's better than the reality that has been created of stagnation this last decade and this, recoil from even touching on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because of this idea that it will bring to more divisiveness in Israel between us and the Palestinians as well, and it can also bring political crises. And do what we need to do that is good for Israel, for the far long-term future of Israel. Yes, one last thing. But the moment you know what your goal is, what your destination point is, then you know that there are steps that you have to take that will help you, or those who will be that will prove obstacles. How do you leave the door open for that horizon, for that? And then you know very clearly what you will need to do in 10 years or tomorrow morning. Thank you very much to you both. I now have the honor to invite to the stage, our Foreign Minister, Mr. Yair Lapid, to the stage, if you would.
The floor is yours. I'm sorry I stopped for a short gossip with Tzipi. My friends, Tzipi Livni, Professor Trachtenberg, Gadi Eisenkot, of course, all of you, Frank. The topic I want to talk to you about, quite predictably, is this central government. The state of Israel, like the rest of the world, has used to divide political arena into right and left. And this division is anachronistic, it's artificial, it's not realistic. When it comes to all the central issues that we preoccupy with all the most central dilemmas of the government, the realistic division is not between right and left, but between Zionistic, democratic, liberal center and the extremities that are dangerous and violent. Most of the Israelis see very similarly the Palestinian issue, economics, religion and state, the right balance between authorities and branches, and mostly because most Israelis agree that we must depart and say goodbye to the Palestinians, but not giving them the right of return or division of Jerusalem. What they are preoccupied with are not messianical hallucinations, but realistic things. Most Israelis, even today, would go for the two-state solution, but they are rightfully asked, how would this second state look like? What will it be like? They are not willing that on our threshold there will be another terroristic, deteriorating Arabic state. They are interested in market economy. They are capitalistic, but not totally so. They believe in hybrid economy where such things as health, welfare, education should be run by the state. The COVID has strengthened that perception. On the one hand, we've all seen how the private sector won these states when it comes to developing destinations, and on the other hand, we've seen that there's nothing instead of a government-run national health organization. Most Israelis are against the religious coercion, despite the fact they're Jewish. They have stayed Jews for thousands of years without any laws that make them be so. Most Israelis know that they should give dignity to the minorities, and this is not weakness, it is actually strength. It's a sign of strength. If there's a problem with planting trees down in the Negev, our duty is to solve it calmly and carefully because we are the strong party. Most Israelis have developed a kind of healthy judgmentalism against the judiciary forces, but they want to live in a balanced government. And interestingly so, not only the centers are coming together, but also the extremists from right and left are bringing us to that point. Those who follow the absorption and those who are post-Zionistic on the right, on the left, they all bring us to the same point, the state for all its civilians. And we will not let Zionism come to its end. We will not let those extremists bring us to the abyss. The right way to run a country is to understand that a change is something that is inevitable. And because of that, we need to manage it very carefully and calmly. The extremists always blame center for flattening and fading positions, but it's actually quite vice versa. There's nothing more flat and stuck than people who will not change their opinion, even facing new circumstances. The question that I was preoccupied with when we founded this government is, why do politics not run themselves the same as the state? Why, when it comes to all the central issues, Israelis agree more than ever, but the political rift is bigger than ever. The political arena must act exactly differently than that. The whole idea, the basis of the political arena is that this is where different opinions and different stances meet in order to come to agreement on how to run the state, the apparatus, the political apparatus. It is not meant to express extremist opinions of extremist populations. This is where the representatives of all the groups come and meet together to negotiate our existence together. Litzman should not be the most extreme person in Gur. Smotrich is not supposed to be the state branch of the Hill Youth. Deri should not lead forward the political rift. Men invented political arena as safety from our tendency to take society to the most extreme corners. Politics is there in order for us to divide resources justly and to find solutions in a calm way. Unlike the accepted opinion, the common opinion, this government did not found itself because we hate Netanyahu. We founded this government because we hate his system that he developed, ruling a country through creating a rift. Israel was on the track for self-destruction, and once the political arena ignites conflicts instead of resolving them, the state goes into, it starts to drown itself, and they can't solve this. And this is what I told my partners when we started this government during those crazy 5 days and 4 white nights when we were sitting at Kfar Maccabiah. This is the question I asked each one of the coalition party, the 8 coalition parties. I asked them all, do you think you could work with people who think differently than you? And once they told me that the answer is yes, we started working the details, knowing we can do it, knowing we can go back to the president and say, we have managed to start a government. We started this government understanding that this is an hour of a test. We need to decide what is good for the state, to create a rift or to create a connection, to go apart to different sides or to come together. In Israel, discussion and argument is not between right and left. Once these two parties became so extreme to forget the most basic principle, which is, I do not want the other side to disappear from the map. I do not want my side to win over totally, which makes me a centralist. I believe that my way is the correct way, but I also acknowledge the fact that conflicting with other opinions is good for everyone. What the goal of this government, which makes it different to all the former governments, is not to advance one side of the political map, but rather to connect Israel and the Israeli society and to strengthen Israel. The extremists weaken us and the centralists strengthen us. The anti-democratic forces weaken us, the democracy, the law make us stronger. The role of governments is to react to great threats over the state. So this was like the government, the union government of Begin, and this is like this government. The greatest threat on us is losing the Israeli coercion. Without inner strength, we have no way of dealing with Iran, with Hezbollah, with the ongoing with the ongoing trial to make us look like an apartheid country. We need to bring together all the different parts of the Israeli society into a unity of sanity, of centralism, facing the craziness that went here in the different systems throughout the last years. We do have our division of opinions, but this is not something that has to continue until one side wins on a knockout. Disagreements are a way to come to a better decision, to a better goal. It's right for a democratic state. It's also right between different democratic states. Disagreement between democracies should not end with one conquering the other and massacring its citizens. It should end with a compromise. The beauty of the democratic idea is not that political parties represent different populations, but rather that the political representatives are sent to do all the necessary compromises to keep sustaining the state. Political arena is not a zero-sum game. There are basic rules. We do not hurt children. We should fight against injustices. No one should be hungry when we have such a good GNP. Another basic principle that sometimes we might forget is that the democracy does not give majority unlimited power. It's actually quite the contrary. Democracy is the way of ruling where a minority has rights that the majority cannot take away from them. Apart from those basic principles, the only way to keep lives together is to always have a negotiation between reasonable people who disagree. I mean, do not agree about everything, but they know that anyway it will not end 100% to your side or 100% to my side. When this government was founded, there were quite a lot of talk about the fact that this is a right-left Arab central government, and I want to challenge this description. It is a central government. It's a centralist government. It's true that each one of the parts of the coalitions have their own opinions. But in practice, this government keeps pursuing and trying to get to the center. We're not trying to win over in a fight. We try to improve the lives of the citizens. The government, unlike all the predictions, is now stabilized. And it's stabilized because it has its own personality. It has a character. It is a central Israeli Zionistic government that is honest and it's here to work. And this is what Israel needs to have now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Yair Lapid. Thank you very much for watching us tonight, our annual conference of the INSS. You can meet us again tomorrow starting 3 p.m. Thank you very much and have a good evening.